welcome to another episode of the 100% Wild Podcast. I'm Mark Kenyon with Wired to Hunt. I'm back here in Missouri with Mr. Matt Drury. How are you, man?
I'm good, buddy. It's been fun having you here doing these in person.
It's nice.
You had to drive a long way for us to do it.
It was a little bit of a hike, but like we were joking about earlier, it's a whole lot nicer setup than what I have back at home. Because usually I have to go to my mother-in-law's house to record this because my internet's so bad at my house. So
nobody wants to do that.
No, this is a good upgrade. So it's nice to talk deer and be in a good setting for it.
Yeah,
So
good deal.
I'm excited about all these different people we've been talking to.
Yeah, I think, that's the thing that we identified early on, that we needed to be more consistent and have really good guests. And a big part of you coming here to the studio was, we were just going to try to knock a bunch out in a few days' time and have a bunch of really good guests. And I think today is no different with our podcast that we're getting ready to do.
Yeah. So tell us, who is joining us today, man?
Yeah, we have Jay Gregory with the Wild Outdoors, and he's been one of the guys. I think he's got the longest running show, or at the time it was the longest running show on the Outdoor Channel. And I know he's moved over to Sportsman's Channel here recently, but he was with Drury Outdoors way back in the day. And Mark and Dad have always credited Jay Gregory and Don Kiske as the two guys that really I guess kind of paved the way for them to understand how to get on and hunt mature trophy whitetails, and Jay's been doing it for a long, long time. So without further ado, we have Jay Gregory joining us. How you doing, Jay?
Guys?
I want you to take us through some of those early days with Drury Outdoors. So you said you think you met Mark around the summer of '91. Is that right?
Yeah, I think Mark and I met. The way Mark and I actually met is I was playing around with the video camera and actually showed a friend down in Kansas City one of our hunts, and he knew Mark, and I think he just showed Mark the hunt, and next thing you know, Mark contacted me, and we just became friends. And at the time they weren't doing the deer thing. I do Mark from all the turkey videos and all the contests he'd won, and we just kind of struck up a friendship, and then one thing led to another, and I was fortunate enough to be a part of the early Drury deer videos, and honestly, and I've said this to a lot of people, and I say it all the time, if it wasn't for Mark and Terry, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today. I mean, they gave me the opportunity to get on camera and do what I love to do. So my hat's always off to them, and they're still, they're the leaders in this industry as far as I'm concerned, about always being way ahead of the curve. So, and they're great friends, great people.
So in those early years, it was kind of before many people really even saw mature giant whitetails like that. What was you guys' secret back then? Like, was it just the spots, or was it the way you were hunting? I mean, Steve Stoltz, we had him on earlier, and he talked a lot about how you guys taught them and him just the things that we probably take for granted now, like wind direction and the way you hunt a big deer. But how did you learn those things? Where did you learn all those tactics from?
I think probably as much as anything, just from trial and error, reading a lot. I mean, as a kid growing up, I just was ate up with it. Miles Keller was a huge influence on me. Probably bow hunting October whitetails, watching that video that's what made me really want to get into doing that. But as far as, back then, food plots were really unheard of. So I think we just got in close to bedding areas, and we did a lot of rattling and calling. And, I don't even do as much of that now as I used to. And I think it's because things have changed, and food is it plays such a predominant part of everyone's hunts nowadays, because everyone's planting food. So you kind of got to get around that. But back then there was really no food. So you had to kind of move into those tight bedding areas. And of course, there wasn't as many people doing it back then either. So I don't know. I look back on that too, and it is kind of, I screwed up a lot. Don't get me wrong. I can, I've made every mistake there is twice, guaranteed. So it's just the way, but that's just hunting in general.
From those early days, what was one of your most favorite memories, or something that you'll never forget, or a story that maybe not many people know from when you were with Mark and Dad in the early Drury Outdoors days?
Oh boy, you know, this isn't exactly a good hunt, but you're talking about Steve Stoltz. I remember the first hunt that I ever went on out of state was to Alabama, and I was with Steve. And I remember that they took us way back in the swamp and dropped us off, and it was like, I don't know, it's probably in the high 20s, low 30s that morning. And we were crossing a log, and I was carrying the camera equipment and whatnot, and I slipped and fell off the log and broke through the ice, and the guy had already left. So Steve didn't know what to do, and I was like, "It's okay, let's just go get up the tree." And we sat there in that tree all morning till like 10. And I remember my clothes were all froze, and there was steam coming off of me. And Steve was more worried about me than he was, but he actually shot, and he ended up shooting a deer that morning. So
wow.
It was that was kind of maybe not a great memory, but it was a memory.
That's cool. Wow. That's cool. Well, and from the time from then until now, you've certainly made a name for yourself. Past the Drury Outdoors days. I mean, you guys bow hunt everything. You've been killing giants, forever. You guys are head shooting turkeys. I mean, you're some of the first that I've ever seen really do that successfully over and over and over. And you guys have created your own brand, and it's really done well in the last 25, 28, whatever years. So we wanted to make sure we had you on and kind of pick your brain on some of these topics we'll go through here today.
Yeah, we've got a number of different deer hunting questions for you, Jay, and
Okay.
we're gonna take advantage of this time to make sure we get those answers. So first, we've got a listener submitted question that we want to run by you.
Yep, and the question of the day is brought to you by Cabela's, the world's foremost outfitter.
Hey, Mark and crew. Thank you guys for the podcast. This is Scooter from South Carolina, and I have a question regarding wounding a deer and whether that deer would come back to the same location that it was wounded at. So to set this up, I took a trip to Ohio, and through a series of unfortunate events, I ended up shooting my backup bow that I wasn't super familiar with. And I actually had a shot at a buck of a lifetime and messed it up. Marginal shot, only had 2 inches of penetration. And after tracking this deer for over a mile, we realized this deer is definitely alive, definitely going to make it. And so in planning future hunts for this year, I'm wondering, is it worth going to that same spot, or is that buck going to go ahead and mark it in his memory as a place to never return to? And would love to hear some of your experiences when it comes to things like this. So thank you guys again.
All right, Jay, what do you think about that situation?
Well, I mean, that is an unfortunate situation, obviously. I'm not going to say that deer's not going to come back to that same spot. I don't know that a deer will actually remember, and this is just my personal opinion, but there can be a lot of different factors of, that deer doesn't necessarily know he was shot anyway. He just knows that he was in an area and something stung, and I don't know that they really have a memory. What I would offer as a suggestion to this person is to make sure, and like I use trophy rocks or biologic rocks to take pictures throughout the summer. So what I would probably tell this guy to do is to get in there with your cameras and your minerals, or if you're allowed to bait in that state, I don't know what they're allowed to do there, but whatever, if it's legal, do it. Put some bait out, get some cameras on, and see if you can't get a picture of this deer in that area. I'd probably spread some cameras out over that general area and see if I couldn't pick him up again. And if you can, then I think it's definitely possible to kill him in that same area. I have actually heard scenarios before, and I know people that have shot deer and then turned around and killed that deer later on. It's not something any of us are proud of when we make a bad shot. But in this situation, it sounds like maybe he just shoulder shot him or hit him somewhere with very little penetration. The deer probably wasn't hurt at all. So probably, that would be my best advice, is try and find this deer this summer. And if he's there and he gets on him, I definitely think he could kill him in the same area again.
Now, if we shifted the specifics a little bit, and if we said instead of him shooting a deer, he just spooked a deer, and this is a situation that I think many of us have been in, where the buck you're after either wins you or sees you or something, he spooks from that location. Now, what would you say, Jay, in that kind of scenario? How long until you think that deer might ever show up in front of that tree stand during daylight, or is it never? Do you completely bail on that spot now, or is there some leeway?
If I spooked him or he winded me, chances are you're probably not going to see him in that spot again, I would say. I'm not saying it couldn't happen, but if you're talking a year later, maybe. If you're talking that season, probably not. I probably would move on and try and find him in a different spot.
To what degree? Like, is it is it just like within shooting range of that? Do you think he would shift and maybe just move 100 yards farther away, or is it dramatic? Do you think like, okay, he's not going to be in this 50-acre area anymore? I mean, how much of a change do you think is necessary?
It just depends, honestly. It depends on how bad you spooked him, how old the deer is, how mature he is. If you're talking about a mature deer and he gets downwind of you and busts you, there's probably a pretty good chance he's not going to be anywhere near that area anymore. I hate to say that, but I've run across that situation myself where, and in talking to even Mark, we've talked about that kind of stuff a lot. And a deer that's mature, and if you mess up once, it's usually a one and done, and unfortunately.
Well, I noticed just in my own experience there, 2 seasons ago, I missed a deer, and last season he came back. I never saw him again that season on camera, no pictures or anything like that. And then the following season, he showed back up right before the rut. And then Adam Wainwright actually had an encounter with him from that same tree stand I missed him from. He was gun hunting, it was opening day of the Missouri gun season. And he saw him, but he was about 30 yards away from where he was when I missed him. So he was just up from there, a little bit. Like he was still kind of traveling that same corridor that he was frequently going on last year or the year before, but it's the first time we had saw him in person, and he was just a little bit out of bow range, but he was totally within gun range. Yeah. So, I mean, he came back. It was just a year later.
It is interesting. I mean, you hear a lot of different opinions on this. To what degree does a mature buck have a memory? Is it a memory, or is it just learned association with a location and a bad thing that happened? I mean, I don't know. Do you think that bucks have some kind of memory of specifics, or is it more of a general aversion to an area because of a bad, consequence or something?
Well, yeah, because you always hear about that. Like once you call to them, you schooled them up, and they'll never react again the same way. Like, so do they? Remember that?
Yeah. What have you seen, Jay?
I think a lot of it has to do with, like you were saying, I think a lot of it has to do with their mood, the instance that you catch them in. Obviously the rut affects bucks in a bad way, a good way for us, bad way for them. I would say that it's more of a learned response. It's a conditioned response that they get. I don't know, it's hard to tell. I don't know if they actually remember or not, but I do know that you can definitely condition a deer for sure. And that's why big mature bucks get hard to kill. And especially you talk to people that hunt in public ground, that deer get a lot of pressure, and they say, well, they never move. Well, it's because they're conditioned, because every time they move in daylight, something bad happens, or they smell something bad. So it pushes them to where they're more nocturnal. So I believe it's probably more of just a conditioned response than it is a memory. Although I guess a conditioned response in some senses is a memory too. So that's why they're tough, no doubt about it.
Yeah, that's the truth. Now, I kind of want to pick your brain, and maybe I'm jumping too quick here, but back to the situation of wounding a deer. Just in general, can you walk us through, for you, Jay, after you shoot a deer, if you haven't seen it go down, can you just walk us through what your typical thought process is? I mean, how do you decide how long you're going to wait until tracking? What are the things you're paying attention to or thinking about? What are some of the things where you think you have wounded a deer and you've tracked all day and now it's day 2? I'm just kind of curious about the specifics of everything you're thinking about through that process. If we're taking Scooter's question and now backing it up, before he realized that this deer survived, what are some of the things maybe he could have been thinking about to help through that process?
Well, number one, because of what we all do, we have the advantage of video. The number one most important thing is to, first of all, figure out exactly where you hit the animal. We always err on the side of caution. So I'm going to say, I'll give you a couple different scenarios. First of all, if we hit one in the ribs but back, and we think it's probably a liver shot, then we're going to always be very careful. I'm usually going to give that deer, if I shoot it in the evening, I'm definitely not looking till the next day. If I shoot it in the morning, there's a good chance I'm probably not going to go till the next morning. I just always err on the side of giving them too much time. Now, obviously, temperatures and everything play into that because you don't want to waste the meat. But the flip side of that is if you jump them and blow them out of the country and they get pumped full of adrenaline, you're never going to find them anyway, and you're not going to get the meat. So there's a delicate decision there to make. Now, if it's a gut shot, it's a 24-hour rule every time, guaranteed. We will not go. If somebody makes a good shot and we're on the blood trail and it goes further than we think it should have, then we'll back out, and we'll give them a little bit longer. But most of the time, you can tell by the arrow placement, that'll usually tell you how long you need to wait. And like I said, for the most part, we always err on the side of caution. And I would rather wait a little too long than not long enough. Everyone knows, once you jump one, they get really tough because they get pumped full of adrenaline. And if there's not a lot of blood for some reason, it can be tough. Well, we've all been there.
It always amazes me because when we get some hate mail about that, if we had to leave one lay overnight, it's like, oh, you wasted all that meat. But my thought process is always, well, if we never recovered it,
right?
What good is it? Because then you're instantly labeled like, oh, you're just a trophy hunter. You don't care about the meat. Yeah, we care about the meat. Obviously, we do. That's we're not just out there for the antlers. But if you don't ever recover the deer, if you don't do the right thing to get the deer, there's no chance to get the meat. Yeah. So I never understand that mentality. I'm sure you've gotten some of that before as well.
Oh yeah. Exactly. You're exactly right. I understand what they're saying. Yes. We all do. Nobody ever wants to lose an animal, and if we find the animal, we don't want the meat to be spoiled. But the bottom line is you got to find the animal in order for that to even become an issue. So, it's the rationale that, well, you should have went after that deer earlier. Well, yeah, if I'd have went after that deer earlier, I would have probably just pushed him out of the country and then I'd have never found him. So, and it's all based on our past experiences. We've all made the mistake of going too early. Yeah. And we know what happens when that happens. You don't usually recover the deer. So you've got to be careful. And that's, it's an educated guess you take on what you do. But I always try and I know Mark and Terry are the same way. They will err on the side of waiting too long. It's just a better situation. He's dead.
Yeah, every time. And the reason why, to your point, is because through the years, they've had so many track jobs, and like people don't understand that it's not just the bucks. They'll kill 30 doe or whatever, 20-30 doe a year. So they see numerous track jobs, and they learn from every single one of them. So they just have 30, 40 years of history to go off of. Right. You know what I mean? So that when in doubt, they always say, when in doubt, back out. And anytime that they haven't done that, it usually hasn't ended well. And so that's what they fall back on, those experiences, and that's why they are the way they are. And, if the weather, if it gets down, below 40 at night, you're relatively safe anyways with the meat, right? Because, the deer cooler is at 42, 43? So you got to think about it like that as well. The only concern there would maybe be coyotes or something like that.
Yeah, that's always one of those variables you can't control. Yeah, you worry about that. But speaking of these kind of tough track jobs and that decision, do you wait until the next day and all that? Do you have any other things that you've learned over the years, Jay, when it comes to one of those tough track jobs where the blood starts drying up or you start finding yourself in that tough deal? Is there anything you've learned that's helped you, whether it be about some basic tendencies that deer tend to have that helped you find them in the past, or anything else that you're thinking about at that point? Like, how do you proceed when it gets tough and you've lost blood and you've already waited till the next day or whatever it might be? What next?
Well, I'll tell you one thing that might be a little bit politically incorrect, but if it's legal in your state and you have access to someone who has a really good bloodhound, that is definitely an option that, and we've used it before. And it's, like we've been talking about, the major thing here is to recover the deer at all costs. So that's something. Now, not all states are legal, so you have to check your state and make sure that it is legal to do that. The other thing that we have found with track jobs is that it seems as though most of these deer always make a big circle. I can't tell you how many times we found deer that we would have swore we'd have never found them where we found them, because they were so much closer to where we shot them than where they thought they would be, or the deer always seem to make a circle. It seems like they always circle back to where they came from. So that's something to always keep in mind if you're having to grid and look for a deer when you've run out of blood. Is a lot of times those deer don't make a straight line. Most of the time they're making a circle back to the area that they came from before they were shot.
What about a couple of those kind of commonly held beliefs that I feel like get tossed around a lot, like deer will go to water, or a wounded deer doesn't want to go uphill? I've heard different opinions on both of those. What have you seen?
Well, I think they will go to water some, and wounded deer that I've been after certainly will go up a hill, because I've been on blood trails before that I've been like, there's no way he's going to go up that hill,
and there he goes.
There he goes up the hill. So I don't know if there's any rhyme or reason for why they do what they do. It seems as though a lot of times though they will circle. They're always in the process of making a circle back to the area that they come from. If they're shot in a spot where they're not going to die real quick.
So
obviously, a deer double lunged or caught in the main artery of a liver or the main run, I mean, they're just on a dead run. Wherever they run to, they're dead when they get as far as they can go. But a deer that's maybe shot in the liver or a gut shot deer that has its wits about them, it seems as though they like to circle back to the area they come from.
In a single lung hit, that seems to be one that's a lot of people struggle with, because you got good blood maybe, but they're going forever. Like, what have you encountered in that instance where it's a single lung hit? How long should you wait before you go in after them? You got good blood, so the instinct is, oh, there's no way he's alive still. Let's go after him. But you jump him out of his first bed, and like you said, then it's all she wrote sometimes.
Yeah, well, and this goes back to kind of this whole meat discussion, is when you shoot one in the lungs, the biggest problem with that is that usually they won't go very far and they'll bed. Well, when they bed, they compress their lungs, so they quit bleeding. And if you only got a one lung hit, and that's the problem with going in too quick and jumping them, chances are if you don't jump them and leave them there, that's where you're going to find them. They're going to be real close to there. They might get up and rebed 10 yards from there. But once they get up and you get them running and they get pumped full of adrenaline and the oxygen goes back in again, and a lot of times that wound will heal, it'll plug, or it'll heal up, not heal, but it'll plug to where they're not bleeding as much. It just makes it so difficult. A single lung deer is one of the toughest, because a lot of times you don't know it's a single lung until it's too late. So there again, it's all shot placement and trying to make sure that you've got a good shot on any deer, which we all do. It just doesn't happen all the time.
So if it's single lung, is that where you have a lot of air, like air bubbles in the blood? Like, so say it's your average guy. He doesn't have video of it. In the moment, he doesn't really remember where he hit the deer. So all you have to go off of is what the arrow looks like, if you find it, or what the blood looks like. So if it was a single lung, is that where it has more air bubbles in the blood?
That's honestly, that's a great question, and I don't really know the answer to that. I just know, like you said, a lot of times on a single lung, you're going to have a lot of blood at first, and then the blood will generally peter out, and they're usually going to go to a bed pretty quick. That's why it's the best thing I could tell somebody is if they were on a blood trail, had a lot of air in the blood, and it bright pink lung blood, and then they go to a bed, and then the deer gets up from the bed, back out, and if it's in the morning, I would probably wait till the following morning, and if it's at evening, I'm definitely waiting until the following morning. And you're just going to hope that if you jumped him, you didn't jump him terribly bad, and he maybe only goes a couple hundred yards before he beds down again, and that's where you'll find him.
It's a tough situation. That's always especially because when you see that blood with the bubbles in it and everything, and you look like a pretty decent shot, you're excited, you want to go get him, you feel like, all right, it's a dead deer, and then to have that, I've seen that
deflating.
type of thing happen. Yeah, no pun intended.
Yeah, exactly.
So I've just got another one of those kind of impossible questions for you, Jay, that I know is very dependent on a lot of different variables and things like that, but I'm kind of curious in your just high-level thoughts. After a situation like this, when you shoot a deer, whether you recover it or not, you've gone in there, you've tracked deer, you've been looking around and stuff. How does that change your hunting strategy for the rest of that season? You know, are you waiting a week? Are you waiting 2 weeks? Or can you go right back in there if it's during the rut and kill another deer, you know, half a mile away or 20 yards away?
Actually, during the rut and during season, I mean, I don't really think that I don't think it really beats up an area too bad if you go in and recover a deer and get out. You know, I'm definitely going to want to give it a few days at least. But during the rut, you know, a lot of new deer are coming into the area all the time. You've got a lot of deer that are passing through, so it's not going to be as critical then as it's going to be, say, during the early season or even the late season. But if it's during the rut and, you know, you've got a lot of fresh deer moving in, moving out, you know, I always like to try and get into my areas. If we kill a deer, get in, get the recovery, get him out of there as soon as possible, and leave it as unmolested as possible. But during the rut, you're going to get away with a lot more with that type of situation.
Well, I was going to say something just like what you said. I mean, I when I'm with Dad or Mark, it's always about you. I mean, we're whispering inside the timber, and even if we recover the animal, a lot of times we'll drag them out and do the field dressing and the hero and all that other stuff that we got to do for video. We'll do that in a whole different location. Right. You know, of course we tag it before we move it, but it's one of those deals where I've seen them, they're so protective about intrusion. In those instances, I think you can go back in there. But, man, I've heard some horror stories, and I've been with some people that just talk at regular levels and, you know, they don't think anything of it. And, you know, they might bring, you know, Uncle Bob and Jim and Joe and all their buddies and, you know, and everybody's talking. And in those instances, I think it probably just kills the spot, really, right? I mean, isn't that what you've probably seen, Jay?
Totally agree. Yep.
Yeah. Very dependent on how you go about it.
Yeah.
But hopefully then if it's that scenario where you're done hunting there, either way, you've got your buck. Hopefully you found it and it was a great season, and maybe you're okay with that. But interesting topic here. I mean, the situation of wounding a deer and having to deal with that is one, like you said, Jay, that none of us ever want to have to deal with. But unfortunately, if you hunt long enough, we almost all do. So it's good to, I think about these different circumstances and be prepared for it, you know.
Although anytime I ever respond this way to somebody that emails us giving us crap, like, I've hunted 35 years and that's never happened to me, I don't take a shot unless it's the perfect shot. So there's a lot of really perfect people out there. I didn't realize it.
It's just not you and me.
It's just not us. Jay, is it you?
Oh yeah, I've been there before. We happen to be, you know, we all get hate mail once in a while, and they're, you know, I think the other funny thing is when I hear people say, well, I shot this great big buck and I didn't find it. Well, where did you hit it? Well, I hit him right behind the front shoulder. I double lunged him.
Sure.
Well, no, you didn't. Sorry.
Yeah.
But no, you didn't. You know, and it's funny because, Matt, I know you guys have been in the same situation. I mean, we do everything on video, and we've actually shot deer before. And I could have swore to you where that arrow hit. Yeah. And then we go back and watch it on TV and we go, oh, wow, I didn't think it was that far back, or I didn't think it was that low. You know, your eyes, you know, when that adrenaline's pumping, you don't always see things exactly the way that it happens. You know, the video doesn't lie. And it's been the opposite, too. I've had shots where I went back and watched it and go, oh, well, he's dead. That's way better than I thought it was, you know. So
not only that, but right in the moment of truth, there's been so many times inevitably where the deer curls or front leg, you know, moves back or forward, whatever, you know, does something that changes your arrow placement. Might have been good, but the deer moved ever so slightly in that moment of truth, and it completely changes things, you know. And like Jay said, we have the luxury of looking at that on video, but that will change how you go about trying to go recover that animal.
Absolutely.
Every time.
You know, and one of the things, you know, Mark and Terry have seen hundreds of deer shot on video, have watched all that. I have too. But every year we will send each other video back and forth via the phone. Maybe a half a dozen times a year, he'll send me a shot and say, what do you think? Mm-hmm. I'll do the same for him. Even if I know it's a good shot or he knows it's a good shot, and then in some cases, maybe not. But it's always it's a learning process. You never quit learning. He's always wanting my opinion. I'm always wanting his opinion. no two shots are ever the same, and you always want to look at that stuff so that you have that, that's in the back of your mind, so you can learn from it. So it's a never-ending process.
And you guys have the luxury, because you've seen so many deer die over the years, that there's a good chance you may have experienced this type of hit that, Mark, and a lot of times what happens is our team members or myself, we'll send it to Mark and Dad. What are your thoughts? And then a lot of times Mark will send it to his core group. So it's Jay Gregory, it's Bobby Culbertson down at Terra Wildlife, who sees, it's an outfitting service down in Mississippi, sees hundreds of deer die, so it's about getting all those opinions. Tracker John, a lot of times Mark will send it to Tracker John, who has a bloodhound or whatever, and see his opinion. And it's just amazing. I guess, the moral of the story is, don't be afraid to ask your friends.
Oh, yeah.
What are you thinking? I hit him. You may not have the video to show, but hey, I think I hit this deer here. What do you think? What should I do here?
The toughest part of that too is you get asked, sometimes you get asked the question, and they're not going to like the answer you're going to give them.
Yeah.
I mean, because there's times whenever you can actually see something that's happening, you're like, man, you don't want to tell somebody you're not going to find that deer. That deer is not dead.
Yeah.
But if they're asked my opinion, and I've seen that shot many times before, I mean, you just got to give them the honest opinion. You can always say, well, you can go look, but
yeah,
and you should go look always.
You should, yeah.
But chances are that deer's still kicking.
Well, there's always a weird instance where you might have really good blood, and maybe it's a single lung issue. I don't know, where you had really good blood, but I mean, we've had these times where we never found the deer. Mm-hmm. And you search, and to your point a while ago, you said the blood will just finally peter out. And it's just like, at that point, you're searching for a body, but I don't think they're dead. It's like, I think he lived. And a lot of times we'll get, trail camera pictures of that deer later on, back to a food source or during the rut or whatever. And it's like, I can't believe he lived through this shot. Like, how is this even possible?
Yeah. But then exactly to Jay's point, too, you'll have the exact opposite happen sometimes, where you have a shot that's like, oh, that deer is going to make it. Mm-hmm. And then, it clips an artery or something wonky happens. And lo and behold, even though the blood dried up or something, if you kept circling, you did find it. So it's like, you always have to assume it's a dead deer.
Yeah.
Do everything you can, because you never want to make their assumption the wrong way.
Yeah.
But
the shot that always amazes me is the one, and I've seen it, with we have 45 team members or whatever, and every year there's about 100 deer kills that we see through Jury Outdoors. And there's always a few where a guy made a bad shot, and it's basically in the backhand or whatever. And it's like, it amazes me how many times they've gotten lucky and it's clipped that artery back there. It's unbelievable. I mean, so sometimes the crappiest shot turns out to be the most lethal just by pure luck.
Right. Sometimes you have to hope for that. Hopefully that's not the case, but bad things do happen sometimes. So I think we've hit this wounded deer thing pretty good.
Absolutely.
It's a topic we never want to talk about, like you said, but has to be sometimes. So anything else on that topic, Jay, that you want to make sure to share?
No, I'll reiterate the point that you guys just made, is always assume the deer's dead. Always put every effort, in finding that deer. And, and the other thing I would say is just be really careful about your shot placement. If you're more careful about your shot placement, you won't have near as many problems finding the deer. Make sure they're broadside quartered away. Try and keep it in the middle of their body, and let her rip.
I'm glad you said that about the broadside or quartering away, because there's a lot of things that just happen, but that's one thing you can't control to an extent, of like when you pull the trigger. Yeah. Like if you wait for that time that they're quartering away or it's broadside, your chances are going to increase a lot more. Obviously the vitals grow for you. Yeah. So it's always a head scratcher when you see somebody take that like extreme quartering 2 shot. It's like, all right, man, like what are you thinking here? And that's those emails that you mentioned, Jay, like when somebody says, I hit him perfect. It's like, well, what was the angle? He's like, he was coming right at me. It's like, well, all right, you probably didn't hit him perfect.
Yeah. I think we put so much pressure on ourselves as hunters to hunt these deer, to find these deer, to get a shot. And I think sometimes that pressure of trying to get to that point puts enough pressure on somebody to take a shot that they really shouldn't,
100%.
Because oh my gosh, I've worked so hard. I got to shoot, even though it's not a great situation.
How many times have you heard a guy say, "I had to shoot"?
Right.
Then if you're saying that, you're probably done messed up.
Yeah,
That's realistically.
It's never worth the risk.
It's just like the fellow that asked the question. He said, I had a very small, I had a 2-inch margin of, I had a 2-inch area I had to get the arrow through.
Yeah,
That
2 inches of
probably
penetration,
should,
I think.
Maybe he should have waited, or not shot, and maybe, I can't second guess for everybody, but you have to make that decision on the go, but definitely puts the odds in your favor if you'll wait for a good shot.
Yeah.
Yeah, very true. Well, I guess with that, Matt, maybe we wrap this one up. Jay, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your expertise.
Well, thanks for having me, guys.
We appreciate it, buddy. You're a wealth of knowledge, and if anybody wants to check out a lot of cool archery-only stuff, it's all bow hunting. It's Wild Outdoors. Jay Gregory.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, to everyone out there watching and listening, a couple quick reminders from me and Matt. If you want the audio version of this podcast, you can go to iTunes or Stitcher or Google Play and be sure to subscribe there, leave a review, take the podcast on your drive to work or on the treadmill or whatever you're doing. You can also submit your very own question for us to answer in the future at wiredtohunt.com/100%wild. And you can follow along with what I'm up to over at Wired to Hunt on all of our social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all that good stuff.
As always, you can check out the video version of this podcast at the Drury Outdoors YouTube channel. While you're there, be sure to check out all the DoD TV episodes and the Killing It in the Kitchens and all the throwbacks and everything else we got going. And as always, follow us on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and DruryOutdoors.com.
Thanks so much for listening.
Peace.